Welcome to Battleline USA. In this episode, we journey back to a time when fear, brilliance, and desperation fused to create one of the most devastating weapons in human history. How did a group of physicists, led by the insights of Albert Einstein and other European intellectuals, push the United States into an arms race that culminated in the annihilation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? This is not just a tale of scientific discovery, it is a haunting reflection on how knowledge can be both salvation and curse. Subscribe now, and let's uncover the story of how the atomic age began. Hitler's rise and the scientific exodus. In 1933, Adolf Hitler assumed power in Germany and swiftly began transforming the country into a totalitarian, anti-Semitic regime. Jewish citizens, particularly intellectuals and professionals, were stripped of their rights and targeted by discriminatory laws. Germany's scientific community was among the first to be decimated. Many of the world's top physicists, including Nobel laureates, found themselves suddenly unwelcome in their homeland. Albert Einstein, already a global icon for his theory of relativity, was among the most prominent of these exiles. He left Germany for the United States, where he took a position at Princeton University. But Einstein wasn't alone. An exodus of brilliant minds followed. Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, Eugene Wigner, Enrico Fermi, and others, many of them Jewish, were anti-fascist intellectuals, fled Europe and resettled in America. These scientists were soon dubbed the Martians, due to their extraordinary intellects and thick European accents. As they assimilated into American academia, a terrifying concern began to grow. If Nazi Germany retained even a fraction of its former scientific talent, could it be on the brink of creating a superweapon? The Einstein-Szilard letter. By 1938, physicists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann had successfully demonstrated nuclear fission in a laboratory in Berlin. They split uranium atoms and observed the release of vast energy, verifying a theory first proposed years earlier by Szilard himself. For Szilard and his colleagues, the implications were clear and terrifying. If this process could be controlled, it could be weaponized. Leo Szilard, deeply alarmed by the possibility of a German atomic bomb, knew he had to take action. But to reach the White House, he needed someone with fame and credibility. He approached Einstein at his home in Long Island, New York. The result was the now famous Einstein-Szilard letter, dated August 2nd, 1939. In it, Einstein warned President Franklin D. Roosevelt of the dangers posed by nuclear fission and the urgency of initiating American atomic research. The letter detailed the feasibility of constructing powerful bombs and alerted Roosevelt to Germany's interest in uranium. Roosevelt was receptive. He responded by forming the Advisory Committee on Uranium, a small government body that marked the first step toward what would become the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project takes shape. The United States entered World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. By then, the groundwork for nuclear research had already been laid. The Advisory Committee on Uranium evolved rapidly into a full-scale military endeavor. In 1942, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers created the Manhattan Engineer District, commonly referred to as the Manhattan Project. The project would become one of the most secretive and expensive undertakings in human history, costing over $2 billion, equivalent to more than $25 billion today. General Leslie Groves was appointed to oversee its operations, while theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer was chosen as the scientific director. Secret facilities were constructed across the country. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, focused on uranium enrichment. Hanford, Washington, produced plutonium, and Los Alamos, New Mexico, became the intellectual core where the bomb would be designed. At its peak, the project employed over 130,000 people, many of whom had no idea what they were working on. Security was so tight that even Vice President Harry Truman was unaware of the project until he became president. The Trinity test and a new era. After years of theoretical work, construction, and experimentation, the bomb was ready to be tested. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., the world's first atomic bomb was detonated in the New Mexico desert. The test was codenamed Trinity. Observers described the explosion as a second sun rising. The light was so bright it temporarily blinded those watching through darkened goggles. The shockwave shattered windows 100 miles away. The mushroom cloud rose over 40,000 feet into the atmosphere. Scientists were stunned by the force they had unleashed. Oppenheimer later recalled a passage from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The test had succeeded. The age of nuclear weapons had officially begun. Hiroshima, the first target. Germany had surrendered in May 1945, but Japan showed no signs of surrender. The Japanese military remained fiercely committed, and American planners feared that an invasion of the Japanese home islands could result in hundreds of thousands, or even millions of deaths. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay took off from Tinian Island, carrying an atomic bomb nicknamed Little Boy. At 8:15 a.m., it was dropped over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Within seconds, a blinding flash of light obliterated the city center. Temperatures soared above 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. People closest to ground zero were vaporized. Buildings were flattened. Fires raged. Over 70,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would die from injuries and radiation exposure in the following weeks. Nagasaki, the second blow. Despite the devastation of Hiroshima, Japan still did not surrender. On August 9th, the U.S. dropped a second bomb, this time on the port city of Nagasaki. The bomb, nicknamed Fat Man, used a different design and plutonium as its core. While the mountainous terrain limited the destruction somewhat, the results were still catastrophic. Around 40,000 people were killed instantly, with thousands more succumbing later. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender in a national radio broadcast, the first time the Japanese people had ever heard his voice. World War II was finally over. Einstein guilt and scientific regret. Einstein never participated directly in the Manhattan Project. In fact, due to his pacifist leanings and perceived political associations, he was deliberately excluded. But his name remained tied to the atomic bomb due to the 1939 letter. In later years, Einstein expressed deep regret for his role in encouraging nuclear research. He stated plainly, "Had I known that the Germans would not succeed in developing an atomic bomb, I would have never lifted a finger." Other scientists, including Oppenheimer, also struggled with the moral consequences of their work. In a meeting with President Truman, Oppenheimer admitted, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman reportedly dismissed him coldly and later told aides he never wanted to see that crybaby scientist again. The nuclear shadow and the Cold War. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not just end a war. They started a new era. Within years, the Soviet Union had developed its own nuclear weapons, triggering the Cold War arms race. The world lived under the constant threat of mutually assured destruction, where a single decision could annihilate civilization. Despite decades of treaties and disarmament talks, the legacy of the atomic bomb continues. The weapons created in the 1940s have evolved into even more powerful devices. The decision made by a small group of scientists and politicians more than 75 years ago still affects global politics and military strategy today. The story of Einstein and the bomb is one of complexity, of fear, genius, urgency, and regret. What began as a desperate attempt to stop Hitler ended in the mass destruction of civilian lives. The scientists who lit the fuse of the atomic age were never the same. And the world, too, was permanently changed. This has been Battleline USA. If this episode helped you understand a forgotten chapter of our past, consider subscribing and sharing. History isn't just about what happened. It's about what it means. And some stories are too important to forget.